Hey, this is Geronimo, and you're listening to the Scene World podcast.
So it is the Scene World podcast. I'm AJ. That is Jorg. And
Exactly. Hi.
in a minute, we'll be talking to
Frank Klepacki.
There you go. Frank Klepacki, yes.
Yep. The famous composer who made music for games like Command & Conquer, Blade Runner, and such things.
Stuff like that, yes.
Yes, and Dennis and I will be doing the interview. And yeah.
Yeah, cool. Very nice.
Nice. Yeah.
And
that was interesting because it took place on my birthday. So
happy birthday, by the way.
Thank you. So it was last week at my birthday, and I told Frank, like, this is the best birthday present ever. I mean, it was super spontaneous, I would say, in a way, because when I made the PR planning with Dennis for this year for Scene World, he was like, "Oh yes, I know the manager from Frank Klepacki." I'm like, "No shitting." And I'm like, "Yeah, do you want me to send an email to him?" I'm like, "Yeah, definitely." And then Frank said, "Yeah, he would be very delighted to be along those ranks of the other famous game creators, composers, and so on that we had on our list.
And
so far.
Even the people that we haven't had on our list, according to ChatGPT.
Yeah, which is also interesting. Yeah. I found out yesterday that ChatGPT actually knows who we are, and it actually has different replies for the Disc Magazine and the podcast.
Yes, it thinks it knows who we are. It has made some errors regarding who we've talked to.
Yeah.
But that's because of how it works. I believe that it only has access to data up to 2021. So it has scrubbed the internet through 2021. Anything past that it can't get to. And so but what it can do is it can infer based on what it knows from the past that these are probably people that we would have talked to. And that's exactly what it did. Is it said, though they talked to these people, and we're like, what? We didn't talk to those people.
Well, I mean, he got David Crane right, but that wasn't a podcast interview, but an email interview for the magazine.
Right. Yes.
So it was partly right, What it actually got totally right was the topics we covered in our podcast so far.
Yeah.
That was impressive, Like it went through the news of our podcast episode in the past or something. Anyway, speaking of which, news. There was the game Kickstarter that I totally missed called Insane Pain, a 16-bit fighting game for the Mega Drive, which is called Genesis in America. And and if you're lucky and you are not too slow, you can actually get physical copies or download the ROM files, because they have some spares of the physical release.
Okay.
Which can be ordered off their homepage. So we will link to that. They actually say the game is inspired by the first Mortal Kombat games and has pre-rendered 3D character graphics like the first Killer Instinct games.
Okay.
So mine went to shipping today. So I'm waiting for it to arrive. Let's see how well it does.
Okay. Cool.
And the game is actually from the indie development studio called Blast Process Games. which is a play on the blast processing feature of the Mega Drive / Genesis.
Right.
Yeah. And here's the interesting thing. The order has to be done via family and friends, because obviously the seller wants not to pay for the buyer protection, the fee and stuff with PayPal. So I had to write, like, in the subject line what the order is for. And of course, I wrote Insane Pain MD game, and that triggered the fraudulent transaction routine from PayPal.
Right.
Because Insane Pain could mean something else.
Yes.
And that was super weird because the German hotline for PayPal Germany wasn't helpful at all. She was like, yeah, you have to be careful what you write, what you write in the transaction description. Ha ha ha. I'm like, okay, nice. That doesn't help me, And so the next day after, I was actually chatting with the English PayPal support on the homepage, because as they used to as they used to send out German emails when I made purchases abroad, I decided to switch the graphical user interface of PayPal to English. So whenever I enter PayPal, I automatically get connected to the English support chat rather than the German one.
Right.
And he actually told me that there is an email address, for the team, and it's called compliancetransaction@paypal.com. And if you email to compliancetransaction@paypal.com, you can explain what the transaction is for, And I also had to explain why I'm sending it with family and friends, because it was a product I purchased, And anyway, 24 hours later, after the transaction was pending, and 3 hours after I sent that email explaining what the transaction is for, that it isn't anything illegal for terms of services from PayPal, I actually got the message that the payment went through. So I was lucky there.
Yeah.
Another person I know, Joachim Hesse, who is a pretty known editor of game reviews and magazines in the past in Germany, he actually had a similar issue when he bought a Mega Drive game, and PayPal thought that the name of the game is actually a person, and they asked him, what is the date of birth from the person? And he wouldn't interfere, and it took them 3 weeks instead of 3 days to get the transaction going. And they would also partly block his account from doing things. So I'm lucky that this Pavel person from the English chat support was motivated enough to tell me the email address of the team, so I can explain what the transaction is for.
Yeah, really.
And not wait weeks or getting my account partly blocked from transaction, Yeah. Because they worded like, for now, this is only affecting this transaction. And for now, this means like, hey man, you could lose your PayPal account. I'm like, super, that's what I need right now,
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of games, I got a couple of news regarding games. One is so there's been a game on iOS and Android and whatnot, Plants vs Zombies. That's been around for a while. And there is now a C64 version, which looks like it's been out for a couple of months now. Somehow it snuck below our sites.
Whoa.
It looks really good. It seems to be a very faithful. It's called Veggies versus Undead because obviously you can't have Plants versus Zombies. It says that it works on it's PAL. And might work on NTSC, but the comments that I'm seeing are that everyone is saying that it works fine on NTSC. So it looks like a really good game. We'll put a link to where you can find that. On top of
working
that,
fine usually means
it's
the
fast.
music is too slow.
Gonna be fast. Yeah.
Too fast. Yeah.
Yeah, it's gonna be fast. But that's on the other another game that I have here is that Seawolf was a game that was released on cartridge in '82 for the 64.
Wow.
Yeah. The original arcade goes back to '78, but the 64 version was put out in '82. As of earlier this month, March, Seawolf 2 has been released.
Wow.
Which Seawolf 2 is like I obviously there's been a lot of time that's passed between the two. As so Seawolf 2 fixes weird sprite clipping. It animates the waves like in the arcade. You can have a joystick or paddle selection. There's less flicker. Adds 3 more ships from the arcade. The 64 only had 3, I guess. The sound effects are updated. There's ambient sounds, animations, a lot of stuff that people didn't know how to do back in '82 that they can do now because of things like the demo scene and whatnot. Have gone to improve Seawolf 2. So that's available. We'll put a link where you can find that. And
awesome.
There's another game also beginning of the month that I found out about. It's called it's a new murder mystery called Accuse for the 64.
Nice.
And it is a text adventure type game, but with graphics, if that makes any sense. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And it's available for free, although the developers will accept donations if you want to do that. It looks pretty good. I haven't played it, but the developers Marco Giorgini, and the description says that it plays a lot like the Commodore 64 classic, The Pawn, which I've never played, but yeah, so that exists, and yeah, that's available. We'll put a link to where you can find that as well.
Awesome.
And that's what I have on my end.
Okay, well then let's jump to Frank Klepacki.
Yes. Oh, actually, you know what? Before we do that, I also want to mention that there was a product that I stumbled across called the Whopper 64, and I sent you video.
Yeah, but I'm not really sure, but it does.
Okay, so what the Whopper 64 does is it sits in your cartridge port. It's just a pass through. So you plug it into your cartridge port, your expansion port on your C64. Then you plug your cartridge into the Whopper, and the Whopper just has a lot of lights that show you what the computer is doing. So there's an IRQ light, there's an NMI light, there's address lights, there's and so when the computer is doing something, these lights just blink on and off and let you know what the computer is doing, almost like a troubleshooting thing. I've got it hooked up right now. I could actually take my if nobody minds the sickness of being moved around, you can see my Ultimate 64 is plugged into the Whopper, which is lit up like a Christmas tree over there. But yeah, it does. It's more of a diagnostics tool than anything else, I think. But I think it's just the fact that C64 guys love blinking lights, and this is just chock full of blinking lights, and it's an inexpensive thing. We'll link to the store where you can get it. It really serves no purpose other than just to be something that you can plug in and see lights blink. But
I see.
But I like it. I think it's awesome. So that's the thing that exists as well. That I encourage people to check out, because it is
awesome.
Because the only way, it's a small, developer that's making this stuff. An independent just one person that's making these things, and the only way that we can support these people is by looking at and buying their stuff, and we want to keep a good market going for the 64 and the Amiga and everything else, because that's how we still have jobs doing this. So
right.
So, and hey, if you're the guy that makes the Whopper or any of these games that we've talked about, please, by all means, get in contact with us. We would love to talk to you on the podcast.
Right. Nice.
Having said that, let's go talk to someone on the podcast.
Right. Now we do. Okay. Talk to you then. Today we have another interview, as always, and today our guest is the infamous and very famous Frank Klepacki.
There you go.
Yeah, nice to have you here. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Yeah, awesome, totally awesome to have you here, especially on my birthday, as I said earlier. Super awesome. It's like one of the best gifts ever, for me personally. I mean, I remember Command & Conquer being my first game I bought from my own pocket money, 1996.
Wow.
And that is actually the title that brought you to fame, kind of,
Yeah, I suppose. I mean, it certainly wasn't anything I ever expected to happen in any regard. And happy birthday, by the way.
Thank you. Awesome.
Yeah. It's fun that we remember, the first things that we, purchase when we finally have, any kind of money or whatever. And back in those days, doing that first Command & Conquer, it was to me like just the most fun job to have, just making music for games. And I didn't even regard it as anything that would be important to people. I mean, I know it sounds weird to say, but in terms of musically, like I always thought like, okay, well, people are mostly into their favorite bands or their favorite, movie soundtracks or stuff like that, concerts, like their video game music is just, ancillary, in terms of how my perception was. And so, but Command & Conquer was one of the first games where we actually got to use music the way that it was recorded and played back in the game rather than using MIDI as we previously did. So I think that had something to do with it, kind of pioneering the technology use, and also just the fact that I was encouraged to do a variety of different music in this game, and the intention at first was just to see, okay, well, what would work and maybe what won't work, and as they put everything in, they were just like, well, you know what, everybody kind of likes all of it, so let's just keep it all in. And it was just one of those experimental games to work on in terms of a soundtrack that, for whatever reason, ended up resonating with the video game public that bought it, and I'm very grateful that they enjoyed it that much.
Actually, what was the starting point for going into computer music? When did that all start?
So that started for me in high school. Well, actually, I should kind of do a little bit of history backstory.
Sure.
I started as a professional musician at a very young age. So I started on the drums, as you can see, and I started when I was about 8, and then by the time I was 11, I started playing professionally with my parents. So at that point, I had an understanding of music, but I wasn't a composer yet. When I got into high school, that's when I realized I wanted to contribute original ideas to my bandmates trying to do original rock music and stuff like that. And I just couldn't speak the language. So I had to learn other instruments in order to do that. So I started playing guitar and keyboards a bit. And then I was already a gamer. So, kind of melded the two together and started programming in BASIC, how do I make the computer play back music for me and that sort of thing. And then I found out about the company Westwood Studios. I was looking for a summer job, and my cousin recommended that I try out as a tester there, and so I did that over the summer. And I wasn't a very good tester because I was too distracted with the game development process. I just wanted to walk around and talk to everybody and find out how you do this. Oh my God, that art looks so cool, and how do you put that together, and how does this game work? And so eventually that led me to the audio director there, and I got to know him and jammed with him a little bit, and so by the time I got out of high school, I was looking for a full-time job, and I ran the idea of like, hey, can you use any help, assistant, intern, anything like that? And so he kind of gave me a shot to prove myself over a few months, and from that point on, I was the full-time composer for Westwood Studios.
Amazing.
Interestingly, yeah.
So I have a question. You told me that the music used in Command and Conquer was used the way it was recorded. I always thought it was a kind of tracker file or kind of MIDI, or was it just audio streaming? How was the process of converting the music?
Yeah, it was audio streaming. It was we converted those into like 22K mono wave files.
Okay, cool.
We played those back that way. So that was how we could condense, the size of the files.
Yeah.
In order to work the game. This is before MP3s were invented and all of that. So, but prior to that, we did, MIDI and stuff like that. But interesting that you bring up the tracker thing, because I think a version of tracking technology was used for the N64 version of Command and Conquer that we did, because they couldn't fit all of the wave files into the cartridge, so they had to figure out a way to kind of chop it up and make tracker versions of it. So
very interesting. Cool. Thanks for the insight.
Mm-hmm.
But that must have been, I don't know, something like a known ground to you, because I saw on your credits you also did music for SNES and Mega Drive / Genesis titles. Because most people only know you for your PC games, but you also did game console music.
Yeah. Well, the Genesis was primarily FM synthesis playback, much similar to PC cards at the time, like we used the Ad-Lib card or the Sound Blaster card, and those had a specific chip in them that accessed, the FM synthesis that we could, then use to create our own custom instruments and playback. And the Genesis had the same thing integrated too.
Yeah.
Genesis did have a sample playback capability as well, so I would often use that for like drum samples, or we would use it for sound effects, or the voices and stuff like that. Now with the Super Nintendo, we could sample all of the instruments into that. So even though it was still MIDI, I could actually, sample my own instruments into that. So like for the Lion King, for example, we did that. However, it was very, very small sized samples. I mean, we had to really squeeze it into there.
Wow.
Because you could only like access 11K at a time or something crazy like that. I mean, 11K, think about that. I mean, nobody thinks about K anymore, right? So that was a challenge. And kind of the funny story behind that was, obviously we're doing something for Disney, and they're very, much overseeing the quality of all of the, way that we're integrating all of their stuff into the game, and audio was no different. So, of course, Hans Zimmer's company, Hans Zimmer did the soundtrack to the movie, and Disney had asked him to send a representative to approve my music. So, and he came over and listened to what I was doing. He's like, yeah, this is kind of simplified, and I'm not sure. And I'm like, okay, well, let me explain to you the limitations of the Super Nintendo and how we have to do this. And once I gave him that whole spiel, he's like, okay, I got it. Change that instrument to a bassoon and we're good.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, interesting.
Simple
Yeah.
as that.
Interesting that you mention it, playing samples on the Mega Drive, because I saw a YouTube video like a year ago explaining that most people back in the day, most coders, programmers, they did it wrong. They used the technique wrong, and the sample quality on the Mega Drive would be much worse than what it could have been. There were only a few composers who actually understood how sampling playing on the Mega Drive really works.
Yeah, it was just about, how did you want to take advantage of the technology, and yeah, if you're just programming it in, maybe you're not paying attention to the quality that you could take advantage of. But a lot of that was still dependent on size of what you could put on the disc. And if the game was, very large, then, you were still limited in, the quality that you probably had to condense things down. So who knows? I didn't do a lot of stuff for the Mega Drive specifically. It was for the Genesis, as it was. And so the sample playback that we utilized was just for that level of it. And then, if it was utilizing the Mega Drive, then I don't think that it really made a difference, because, the original game was done on the first version of it.
Interesting question. When I interviewed other composers back from the 80s, 90s, many weren't aware of the PAL NTSC speed difference. How was it for you? Were you aware that, or did you make sure that your music plays correctly in the European side of things, or wasn't that your concern?
As long as the files were to our liking in the game the way they were, then converting it to the other versions wasn't a problem, because that technology was very universal at the time still. So so that wasn't an issue.
Okay, well, I'm just asking because I know cases, for example, RoboCop 3, where the European version plays 25% slower because the coders didn't care to modify the play routine. As you mentioned, back in those old computers and consoles, you had to code a player routine to actually manually play the music. And sometimes they were like 60, 50 hertz. We don't care about the difference. As long as the game doesn't crash, we are good.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. Yeah, I mean, those were just like the Wild West days of making games, and just technology changed so rapidly during that time period. Like every year that there seemed to be a new console or a new audio card or a new technology to take advantage of that somebody came out with. And so yeah, keeping track of all that stuff definitely kept us on our toes.
You mentioned sound chip of the Adlib sound card for the PC. That must have been OPL2, OPL3 from Yamaha.
Yeah.
Those sound chips, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely.
Awesome. It's super interesting for me that you still all remember all those little details from like 30, 25 years ago and stuff.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because I kind of took myself down a memory lane a bit. A while back, I put out my own solo albums, usually pretty often, at least every year or every other year. And one album that I put out was called Conquering 20 Years. And the whole idea was that I went through my kind of history from when I started in terms of utilizing the technologies that were available in terms of the scores. So like the first song on the CD is called 8-Bit Dragons, as a reference to Dragon Strike, the Nintendo entertainment system cartridge, that worked on. So I very much composed something very limited in that capacity, where I just utilized the exact waves that were used by the NES, and then composed a piece with only 3 or 4 monophonic channels, and did that. And then the next one I did after that, of course, was an homage to the Genesis and / the Ad-Lib Sound Blaster cards, and I took a simulation of the Yamaha chip that was now available as a virtual instrument, and then I utilized that to compose a new piece in the style of that. And then I kind of just went on down the line, utilizing Roland sound canvas sounds for another one, and then so on and so forth. And then the limited synthesizers that I used even from back in the day. So I kept doing a gradual escalation of technology, of instrumentation that I had utilized over the years in this album as a concept. And it was just kind of fun to go down that memory lane trip again.
It's pretty cool.
Awesome. Yes, it's especially interesting because many people are like, I don't care about the old stuff. Who wants to remember the past, But just recently, somebody made a conversion of your Hellmarsh music piece from Command and Conquer Red Alert for the SID chip of the Commodore 64, and it's like wow, So
there's
totally amazing.
There's a lot of chip tune artists out there that take the old tech and do new stuff with it, or do remixes with it, and it's fun to see that when it happens, especially when they do a good job of it, and yeah, it's funny. But everything old is new again, right? I mean, everybody loves vinyl again. Like, I never thought that would make such a resurgence.
Yeah, true. Or music cassettes,
That I still don't know what people are thinking by picking up cassettes again. I'm just like, really? Like, that was...
Yeah. I mean, just recently I got my first Walkman,
And you're definitely living the retro over there, man. It's great.
Exactly. I mean, I thought it would be interesting for you because I guess most interviews and most panels you attend to are mostly about Command and Conquer, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I obviously I do get asked quite a bit about that still, which is fine. I mean, I'm glad that it's still got a life behind it, and we did just remaster those games, so
True.
they have a new life all over again as well.
True. I've read a little story recently that actually you redid the soundtrack of Blade Runner, because that for the game back then, when redoing it actually had a better quality than using the original recording from the movie.
Yeah, so the movie, of course, is from the 1980s, and that was all done on like analog tape, and of course it's a brilliant score, and I always loved it. So when we got to work on the game, the interesting challenge I was faced with was that we had the rights to the music in terms of the score, but not the recordings. So basically we could recreate whatever we wanted to, but we couldn't just pull it off the movie score, the movie CD. So that's what prompted me to recreate some of the main themes from the movie to utilize in the game. And I really just painstakingly went note for note, sound for sound, as close as I could possibly get it. And spent a long time on that. And and of course I'm utilizing technology in the late 90s, and everything's digital, and so there's no tape hiss, and there's no analog things, what do you call it, a character about it. So because of that, the recordings are very clean sounding, and so a lot of people were commenting on that because they were already used to the movie soundtrack, and then they would hear my version and go, wow, this is like crystal clear, so it was just one of those things where taking advantage of modern recording quality and being able to utilize that when working on the game.
It's very interesting. You mentioned the crystal clear audio. Do you remember which synthesizers you used back in the days, or which you are still using? You have some examples?
Yeah, well, for Blade Runner in particular, I mean, so I had kind of a general setup that I was using at Westwood at that time. by the late 90s, I was using, I had an Ensoniq ASR10 keyboard. I had a Roland S760 sampling module. I had a Roland JD990, the 2080, later on the 5080. And a lot, I had a lot of sample library CDs with instruments on them. And I had one that was, or maybe a couple of them that focused on analog, synthesizer sounds of the 80s. And so I was able to find, the instruments that, matched up very closely and or were taken from, synthesizers that were used in the Blade Runner soundtrack. So I was able to utilize those and find the right sounds there. But I used that same setup for everything else too, that I worked on, whether it was Command and Conquer or Lands of Lore or, all of that stuff. And it was what was available. And, every time something new came out that I found interesting or that I could really take advantage of a lot of new instrumentation, then I would usually wait to make a purchase like that, from the audio department's budget and integrate that. And as we went, just kept adding to it, and everything was outboard. There was no, it wasn't in the box like it is today. We have access to everything in the computer now. They're all plugins and virtual instruments. But back in the day, you had hardware synths, and that was it. So I had racks of this gear, and it looked impressive. You go into my office and you just see all of this stuff, big mixing board, all of that. And now it's so funny because all of that is just gone, and all you really need are a good pair of speakers to monitor, the mix and an interface, in the rack, and that's it. Everything else is in the box.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. So today, basically, you can just make everything. What you make with your rack just with a copy of Omnisphere probably, or a lot of VSTs, and that's it. But I still love the JD990 you mentioned. It's also one of my favorite synths. I still have it here and using all the stuff from Roland. It's pretty cool to hear that you make the music with the Roland stuff. It's pretty cool.
I still have the key pieces of gear, hardware. I still have the Ensoniq ASR10, Still have the Roland 5080. I still have the Korg Triton, rack, actual physical units. So and those came in handy because when I worked on the Command and Conquer remaster, there was a handful of songs that I could not find on the original DAT tapes, and so I had to actually recreate them from scratch and find those exact sounds.
Okay, nice.
Really? Okay, so it wasn't so straightforward after all.
Yeah, most of it was, but there was a handful of tracks. I was just like, damn it, I can't find these anywhere. I don't know what happened to them. So got to fire these old babies up.
Yeah, they still work. They still sound great. I think they are rock solid. Yeah.
I mean, I wonder when you worked on those games, did you know that you would reach a certain level of fame among certain people? I mean, your name goes along those other composers, like Rob Hubbard and so on and so on. And did you know back then that you would make a name out of yourself? I mean, especially in the 90s, I remember people were often thinking that video games is a waste of time and you shouldn't put a career into it, and it's not serious music and all those plip plop weird sounds that's coming out of synthesizer. Who wants to listen to that? So
yeah, the bleeps and blips. No, it's interesting. Yeah, like I said, the perception back then was very much that to the general public, and only the video gamers, really, were into it, in terms of understanding that. For me, like I said earlier, I had no idea that I would gain any notoriety from that. I didn't think people took it that seriously. When Command and Conquer did start to get a lot of attention for the soundtrack, I kind of was dismissive of it. I was like in denial, sort of a thing, oh no, that just got to be a few diehards talking about it. There's no way that it could be that big of a deal. And So I kind of, just didn't even think much of it, to be honest. But when Red Alert came out, that blew the doors off of it. I mean, people just were like clamoring for the soundtrack, and it started getting written up in all these magazines and just turned into this thing. And I ended up getting awards for it. And I was just like, wow, okay, this is bigger than I think it is. Apparently there is a worldwide audience for this. So,
I mean, even for the third part, Command and Conquer Tiberian Sun, there was actually a day called T-Day, and at least here in Germany, gamers were in queues in front of electronic stores waiting to buy the Command and Conquer games. Nowadays, you only see such things if a new iPhone is released.
right, yeah.
And those were the times that people actually stood there hours waiting for the game, and it's incredible,
It was the iPhone of the 90s gamers.
Exactly, yes.
Back when that
So
physical product was king, and people cared enough to wait for it,
Absolutely.
and be there day one. I mean, it was the same thing with concerts back then too. People would stay overnight lined up for the concert tickets going on sale the next day at their local ticket outlet, because the internet was not a thing yet for that, and that kind of ruined it, I think, because once the internet became available to purchase concert tickets, well, that meant anyone could purchase tickets anywhere around the world for any city, and so then they all get snapped up like that and scalped. So it's just like, that took the fun out of it. Like, if you was local to where you were, then it meant that only people that lived there could get the tickets, and then so be it. If you do what you want after that, but at least it was drawing from that local community pool. And it was the same thing with video games. The video games were available at your video game stores or electronic stores, and yeah, if something came out you were looking forward to, then you would be there day one to get it. And that was exciting. There was always something exciting about that sort of camaraderie that you got with your fellow gamers or your fellow music enthusiasts or whatever that wanted to be a part of that, and then immediately just start playing together and get in on the LAN parties and all that good stuff.
It's especially interesting because when the PC era started, like to take off, like in the middle of the 90s, the old habit of sometimes buying a game because your favorite musician did the music for it died off. I mean, if you think about it, there are not many other musicians in your industry that made a name out of themselves, where people are like, okay, it's from Frank Klepacki, So the Command and Conquer kind of restarted this thing. People were like, oh, he made the soundtrack again. That must be a good game, because Frank wouldn't work on something that is crap, So isn't that what you think sometimes when you see certain games and they are so awful, but you are still contracted to do the music for it?
Well, I mean, you never really know how some things can turn out, right? I mean, you work on something with the hope that by the time the end product is finished, that it's going to play well, and it's a good game. But sometimes it's out of your control, and you just you do the best you can with the work you're hired to do for the client, and you make it happen. I'm fortunate to have been part of many great games, or many people that have loved these games over the years, or still find great memories and nostalgia, or meaningful things that brings them joy from those times. I hear stories from different people all the time about personal experiences that meant something to them because of these games, like whether it was guys that got to rebond with their dads, or family members that were kind of estranged, but the game brought them together, and they'll never forget that, because it just improved everything. And or got them out of hard times. Somebody was laid up in the hospital or something with a really bad injury or bad health issues, and they played this game, and then that just gave them the sort of energy they needed to recover, or things like that. it's really endearing to hear stuff like that. I don't really think of people buying games necessarily based off of who did the soundtrack, as much as if the gamers like particular composers, then maybe they'll follow that. But ultimately, I think it is a package at the end of the day. We are part of a team at the end of the day, and I've always looked at it that way. I'm one piece of the puzzle to all of these great talents that are contributing to making these things. I mean, there's so much that goes into it, and when you see that day to day the way that I do, you very much appreciate it. When you see how many programmers it takes to put something together and how many hours they put in to do it, and artists and and the producers keeping track of all the schedules and trying to predict the future as to when something is going to get completed by, and all the way down, just it's really, and the designers, of course, constantly iterating and constantly changing their mind about what's fun and not working and what should be redone, and it's a constant evolution. And I get to see that happen from day one up until the game is finished, and it's a privilege to be able to do that. A lot of composers don't have that luxury, especially if they're contracted and not actually salaried on the company. So they'll get brought in at the end of a project and only have a few months to crank out everything and hope it works out great. So it's it's an interesting mindset for sure.
Well, or you are a special person. I mean, I remember this story from Rob Hubbard, who was contracted to make the Commando arcade music score on the Commodore 64, and he decided, like, oh, come on, I make something up myself. Yeah. So, who cares, And then it became one of the most iconic computer game music pieces ever, by creating something totally different. So basically not fulfilling your contract.
Yeah, sometimes you take a creative risk, it'll pay off, right? I was very fortunate in the old days to be encouraged to always experiment and try new things, and and be creative, think outside the box. Like a lot of times I would come up with something that I thought was literally what was needed, and then I would be told, well, that's fine, but what about if you did something else, and I think I tried to overly understand what was being asked of me rather than just kind of let things flow, and I had to kind of learn that along the way, and I appreciate it a lot more looking back on it now, because I realized that helped kind of push me a little bit, push my boundaries, and allow me to evolve as a composer too.
Is there something you would improve if you could redo it, thinking from the today's perspective? Or are you entirely happy with everything you did in your career?
For the most part, I'm pretty happy with everything. There's been challenges that I wish, could have been overcome a bit more, or I might have had more time to work on things, like, for example, there was a TurboGrafx game we did called Order of the Griffin, which was a D&D game. And the issue I had with the soundtrack in that game was that the TurboGrafx kept changing the tempos. Every time we would load back into a level, it would like remember the tempo of the last track and apply it to the new track, and it was like this bug that I could not escape, and so it just made me very frustrated. So the soundtrack didn't quite come out the way I wanted to on that one, just for the technological aspect of it. Then there was a game called Nox that I worked on, and that's one of those games where I just wish I had more time to work on it. I would have spent a bit more time massaging that soundtrack and getting it to a place that I would have felt a little bit better about. I was just in such a rush to get it out, because it's like, hey, by the way, we know you're working on 2 other projects, but we got this other thing, Nox, and that needs to be like done in 2 months. I'm like, oh my God, okay. So my brain was just scrambling, between 3 different projects that I'm trying to like wrap my head around stylistically, and it's tough to just switch your brain on a dime like that, when I'm going from writing electronic rock music to medieval music and now some sort of fantasy thing. And so there's some nice pieces in that game, and I'm still happy with how it came out, but I wish I would have had more time on it though. So it's just stuff like that that I look back on. There's nothing really that is something that I don't like or didn't care for. It was just more of a thing of what was the challenge I faced, and what do I wish was a little bit different.
I mean, so far you must have done really well because you won a lot of awards for your pieces.
Some, it's nice to get recognized for that kind of stuff. I don't really I don't really pay much mind to that either, only because I mean, there's so much great music out there. There's so many talented composers out there, and I'm a champion of just seeing more creative chances being taken with different games. Especially nowadays, I just felt like there was sort of a period where a lot of things were being copied. A lot of styles were being copied, and there was lacking melody, because it was so much trying to mimic like the Hollywood, stuff, and even a lot of movie soundtracks. I'm just like, I don't remember a thing about them because there's nothing to grab onto. It's just a lot of sound design and tribal drums and horn rips and staccato strings, and what do you have to walk away from? This is sort of one of the reasons why I cite, John Williams as a main influence for me, because every time I left a movie that he scored, I remembered it. It was impactful, and it had a melody, and it just, brought you into that experience that much more. So that's something that I try to pay mind to when I'm composing things. I try to create something that I feel like has some sort of a hook, or some sort of memorable moment that is associated with a game. And I'm not saying I always hit that, but it's something that's always, I think, deserved to be strived for.
I wonder, did you have a look what other of your industry colleagues did? I mean, for example, you mentioned Adlib, OPL, Yamaha Sound a bit earlier. For example, Bobby Prince is a big name doing music for Apogee, for things like Plague Stone and such games, or Duke Nukem. Were you actually aware of what other people were doing in the industry?
Yeah, definitely. Like we played a lot of different games too. Like I remember loving the score to like Secret of Monkey Island.
Michael Land, yeah.
Yeah. And Pete McConnell, yeah. And then all of that stuff was really cool and clever. I remember the Fat Man, George Sanger. I mean, he did like a lot of games of that same kind of time coming up, and then obviously Westwood was acquired by Virgin. Tommy Tallarico was working at Virgin, so I ended up talking to him, a bit on stuff, and we were, pretty close in age, so both youngsters coming up in the industry there. Yeah, there's and then over the years, there's been a lot of game soundtracks that I like, or composers that I've really paid attention to, guys like Alexander Brandon, guys like Jack Wall, and the list goes on and on. I mean, even more recently, games like Ori and the Blind Forest had beautiful soundtrack, or Cuphead, loved that. It's just so different.
Cuphead, yeah.
So anytime I see, those are things that stand out to me, if there's something that's kind of different and interesting, yeah, all of that. I love Richard Jakes. It's another great composer, does great orchestra stuff and big band stuff, funk stuff. I got a chance to meet him and become friends with him, and he's great. So yeah, there's a lot of great talent out there, and I have a lot of appreciation for. I very much kind of stick to the influences and filters of my own that have kind of been just part of my style over the years, and I continue to draw from new influences, but I try to look in new places now for that I previously hadn't, even if it's older classical stuff or whatever. Like, for example, the latest game I'm working on is called The Great War Western Front, and it's a World War I based strategy game and RTS. And so for that, I went completely traditional orchestra, but I listened to a lot of classical composers from that era in order to kind of influence the way that I was doing things. So it's always a new thing for me to look forward to diving into and trying to see what haven't I tried yet, and what can I draw from now that's different.
Do you
Cool,
miss
but,
the?
sorry,
Sorry.
but speaking of influences, it's what's pretty interesting to me, coming back to Command and Conquer, of course, the sound was pretty much like this early 90s techno and industrial. Were you influenced by the techno scene back in the days? Were you partying? Were you listening a lot to this music? And what drove you to make this kind of music for Command and Conquer?
So when I kind of got the idea of what Command and Conquer was, reading the story, and the factions and all of that kind of stuff, like I said, in the early days, I was drawing from a lot of different stuff and just trying different genres of music. So it was all over the place, and that's why the soundtrack's so diverse. But I definitely was influenced by a lot of the 90s scene that led up to that. Grunge music was new. The Nine Inch Nails was a band I loved at the time, so I was really into that. And then that got me into listening to more industrial kind of stuff. Definitely techno was on all of the dance floors of the clubs at the time, so I was exposed to that, hearing what DJs were playing, and different radio shows, college radio and stuff. They would always be playing weird, crazy stuff, and I was, just checking it out and seeing what it was about. I would go to the record store and buy CDs of compilations of like newer artists and undiscovered stuff that was in those genres, just to kind of say, okay, what's kind of on the cutting edge, what is what's the new thing coming out here that I'm not aware of, and how can I find sound palettes and instruments and weird things to integrate. Voice samples were obviously kind of a trend of that time too, and that's why a lot of that was integrated too. So it was just sort of, this hybridization of all of these influences that, I was exposed to at the time. And I even brought a little bit of the 80s with me into that too, obviously. I mean, there was soundtracks like Top Gun that I was a big fan of, Harold Faltermeyer, and, Vince DiCola from like the Transformers 1986 movie, in the Rocky IV soundtrack, synthesizer sounds like that I wanted to integrate into it. And I was a big fan of, like old 80s hip hop and the electronic sounds of that era too. So like I found ways to incorporate a little bit of all of these little elements throughout that soundtrack, and taking advantage of sampling technology too and all of that. So it all just kind of fused together for me.
Cool, very cool.
Awesome. I wonder, did you have a look about what's coming out by Slipgate over THQ Nordic, working on Tempest Rising, which is like a homage on Command and Conquer? I mean, even the fractions are named similarly,
Yeah, it's they're definitely doing a love letter to that, which is interesting. Yeah, I got to meet some of the team this past year when I was at Gamescom. I was there, promoting the Western Front and doing a lot of press. But then, at night, you go out to the bars and stuff. And so, yeah, I got a chance to talk to some of those. It was fun.
Will you be at Gamescom this year?
I don't know. I'm not sure yet. Because our game is shipping, at the end of this month, the Great War. So after that, I'm not sure what the plans are.
I guess we can see.
Oh yeah, I was gonna say I am gonna be planning on performing in the Czech Republic in June for a game convention there called Game Access. I think it's June 3rd. I'm playing there with the Tiberian Sons. We're gonna do a show down there.
That was actually supposed to be one of my next questions, because you mentioned Tommy Tellerico, and I know you also played on the Video Games Live concerts, right?
Yeah. I've done a lot of guest appearances on those over the years. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I mean, perhaps if we could meet, because we will be there at Gamescom. Dennis personally himself as well, so
okay.
Perhaps we could meet. I mean, we always have a booth with our retro magazine there and stuff, So perhaps we could meet if you happen to be there, and you could talk about what your plan is and what you have in the pipe.
Sure.
If you like, and if you are in present there.
Yeah, if I have to be there, that would be fun. Definitely.
Awesome. Yeah. So let me ask you about the concerts. How did it happen for you? How was it for you to play in front of big audiences for the Tommy Tillerico concert. Your video game titles that you are known for.
Yeah, it was a really great experience. There's nothing like, having a symphony playing behind you. It's great. Yeah, I always dreamt about, the idea of performing the CNC music live with a band, and I just never like put it together, like what would be the right venue or the right place to do it, or is there enough of an audience that would come out and see something like that? Like, I was kind of oblivious to that. What was cool about the idea of the video games live thing was that it brought the greatest hits of video games played by the symphony, and in doing so reinvigorated interest in the orchestra for young people to appreciate this is what they connect with, and why not have that as your doorway into that world. If you are interested in playing an instrument or being part of something like that, you could be an orchestra player that's playing on video game soundtracks now. So it's kind of interesting to me how a whole generation of people, or a newer generation of people are now coming up this way, and this is the thing that they gravitate towards and what they appreciate about things that before had to usually reference something else. Like in my generation, we definitely looked at the symphony as playing classical Beethoven, Mozart, or film soundtracks. Maybe film soundtracks were the more interesting thing for us, if we weren't classical minded. And so so the video game soundtrack thing is really cool. There was another thing I guest appeared on, which was the Games in Concert series they do in the Netherlands, and I did one of those, which they provided a full band for me there, and it was actually a popular band that was from that area, and so it was very awesome to have that experience too, and get the reaction from the audience for that. They were really super into it. I remember I wasn't sure what to expect, going to a different country and playing that stuff there. And so I figured it would be very similar experience to the video games live thing. And afterwards, usually they would have us, around to sign autographs or whatever. And there'd be some people hanging out and wanting a little bit of something or other, but it wasn't like overwhelmed. But over there, I was definitely overwhelmed. After I played, I got pretty much mobbed right afterwards. And then so I said, look, let's wait till after the concert is over, and then we'll meet in the lobby. And I was there until we closed the place down at like 1 or 2 in the morning. And it was really just endearing, just to know that there are people that love that music that much, and that even came prepared with stuff. Like they were bringing out old Command and Conquer, boxes and PlayStation discs and all kinds of stuff, shirts, whatever. And it was really cool. It was something else. So
I guess, yeah. Awesome.
So that led me later on to the idea that, hey, maybe this could work out. And then I ended up befriending the Tiberian Suns band, and so then they had informed me about this festival called MagFest, and from there I contacted the organizers there, and they offered me a slot to perform there. And so then I called the guys and I said, hey, I got offered a slot, so I guess you guys should be my band, so we joined forces on that, and put on a great show, and I couldn't have been happier with how it turned out. And as a result, we're doing more stuff together. So we got to actually record our versions of that as a bonus for the remastered collection. And then we did an EP together, which came out last year, and that's been licensed for a couple of games. And now we're looking at what we're gonna do this year, and one of those things happens to be this concert coming up too. So yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Cool.
I guess this mob, as you mentioned it, I guess many people would say it's the Sean Romero moment.
Yeah.
Because we interviewed once Brenda Romero, and she said that there was a situation in a hotel where John was really like, she said he was looking like grandfather's dad or something, but people still were like, John is in the lobby, and everybody was mobbing towards. How did that feel for you? Were you shocked about in this situation?
I definitely was shocked. Yeah. I didn't expect to have that kind of reception, honestly. So it was an eye-opening event. But actually, the funniest part of it though was afterwards, after we closed the place down. I was staying in a hotel like nowhere near there. Like the concert was in Utrecht, and I was staying in Dudingham, which is further east. And so I get off the train going back to my hotel, far away from this place, and these two teenagers are walking down the street, and they see me with the guitar on my back, and they're like, "Hey, Mr. Guitar Guy, play us a song, man," and they're just kind of like heckling me a little bit. And I'm like, "Yeah, I already played my concert. I'm done." And they're like, "Oh yeah, where'd you play?" And I'm like, "Oh, we played the Games and Concerts show." "You're Frank Klepacki? Oh my God, we're so sorry. We didn't mean any disrespect." And like, I'm like, how do you know me? Like all the way over here.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, for you, it's just a job,
Yeah.
And it's super interesting. I mean, you mentioned it earlier. There are so many different people working on a game till it's done, but it's interesting for some reason. It's not like people remember a game because of who did the graphics.
Yeah, I mean, the unsung heroes behind the scenes, right? I mean, I think that music probably gets a bit more attention because of the fact that it's an audible connection that is made to the player, and much in the same way that you experience film or TV or whatever. I mean, music is something that is an emotional context for everything, and so if you're any kind of appreciator of music, then that's a memorable thing that will stick with you, and that's why it's an important part of game development, because it does provide that emotional connection. So I understand that now for sure. Back then I had no clue.
I mean, I see you also did music in TV shows. How is that different in a way?
Well, it's linear, right? So television, film, it's linear. It happens the same way every time. So you get a scene and you score to that scene, and then you line up, the beats to what needs to, happen when, and then that's it. It's going to happen that way every time you watch it. Whereas video games, that's not the case at all. The player's in charge of when and where and how they're going to do things. Now, granted, they might be on a bit of a grid in terms of, order of things, but not often. I mean, there's a lot of games that are more open-ended now, so you can go off and do different things or side quests, or or do things in a different order than someone else might, and still achieve the same thing. So you have to have a musical context for the things that are happening at any given time that they decide to do. And so that's the challenge of figuring out, okay, how do I start off this level and anticipate that he could go one of 2 or 3 different places, and then have an answer piece for that. Like, is he going to go straight into combat, or is he going to go exploring, or is he going to stumble on a special event that is supposed to happen later, but he might go to that first. So you got to kind of plan for those anticipatory things, and have cues in mind for that, or not. I mean, you could even have a decision to have the music go silent if you want something to be enhanced with ambience or sound effects, and have a special moment with that. So there's a lot of implementation decision making that goes into doing video game scores versus doing something for television or for film, where it's very, like I said, very linear, and what you see is how it's going to happen. You just score it to that, and then you're done.
Awesome. Yeah. I don't know, Dennis, do you have any question right now in the mind?
I don't think so, but probably you mentioned before you're still using the old synthesizers, but can you mention some new stuff you're using for at least for the electronic part of your music nowadays? What are you using?
Yeah. Well, a lot of stuff is in the plugins, in the virtual stuff.
Yeah.
So I rely on that quite a bit. You mentioned Omnisphere earlier, so that's certainly in my arsenal.
Okay.
Serum is one of my favorite synthesizer instruments. But I use Contact, as a main, like, sampling playback, of a lot of different instruments, especially the orchestra stuff. I use like Cinesamples, for orchestral instruments, and for mock-ups, and if it's going to be virtual, prefer to have live recordings, of course, whenever the budget allows. But and fortunately for the new game I'm doing, The Great War, we did have a live orchestra record that, so that was great. But yeah, I use stuff like that. Those are kind of my main go-tos, I guess, and I just have a lot of different, libraries of different types of instruments available for whatever mood or hybridization I'm looking to do. And of course, I've got, guitars, basses, live drum set here, so I can record myself playing at any of those instruments as well, along with that, and anything that I don't play, I can hire somebody to do. So
Nice. Cool. Thanks for the insights. Very interesting.
yeah,
Awesome. I wonder, I mean, you probably heard about the retro craze going on since, over 10 years now, that even there are new games released for old consoles, like Super Nintendo, Mega Drive, and so on, often via Kickstarter or other crowdfunding platforms. I wonder, if you were asked and if you got the funding to hire you for making a score on a new Mega Drive or a Genesis or Super Nintendo game, would you do it?
Yeah, if the budget worked out, then yeah, sure, why not?
So you would not be scared digging in the old electronics again and working on the machines?
No. I mean, it's still gonna be, how I remember doing things. So just, gotta dust off the memory a little bit, but it would be fine.
Awesome. Do you actually follow what's happening with new games on old consoles, or is that something you don't really pay attention to a lot?
Honestly, I haven't paid attention to a lot of it recently. I mean, but once in a while I'll hear rumblings about something that's interesting. Like I've gone to, like, we used to have the Classic Gaming Convention here in Las Vegas, and that was a big focus of it. Actually, you would see guys, with new Atari 2600 cartridges, of new games, and I'm like, really, this is still really happening, and it's cool. I mean, it's cool that there's still a market for that, even if it's niche or whatever. I mean, it's fun that these old consoles, I mean, there's a charm to those, and I understand that, because I have fond memories of playing games on those consoles, and I certainly wouldn't mind going back and replaying them again, and doing that sort of thing. And actually, I'm quite fond of newer games that come out that echo a retro style. For example, like one game that was kind of recent in the last year, Vampire Survivors, I really loved playing. So I got so enthralled with it, I just had to unlock every achievement. So I just kept playing it, But it reminded me of the good old days of playing like the old SNES games and stuff. So I enjoyed it very much for that. I like casual games as much as I love huge sandbox immersion games.
Yeah. I mean, especially those things became famous when, for some years back, I think it was 2006 or something. I don't know. It's a while ago, when Gianna Sisters was recreated for the PC, and they actually didn't ask for the permission to use the music. They actually got the permission after the game was actually before it was released. So that was quite interesting. So they did a reverse thing. They first did the game, and then they used the music, and they got the license afterwards. And Chris Hülsbeck was saying, like, yeah, I will do the new soundtrack for it. You can hire me for it. So that's kind of risky, because sometimes in those projects, companies like Disney and so on are actually shutting it down because of missing licenses and stuff. So it's a very dangerous minefield sometimes when people try to make a homage on a game and getting too close to the original things,
Yeah, it just depends on like I said, what kind of licenses are available or not, and then you have to kind of deal with it. Very similarly, like I did with Blade Runner. Like yeah, you can use the music, but you can't use the recordings. So yeah, you got to recreate it, or and then if you can't even do that, then you've got to just come up with something stylistically that's close, and try to just at least make it feel like it belongs in that IP.
Awesome. So, what are your plans at the moment? Can you talk about some that are not secrets? Or are all your plans fulfilled and you are happy in your life? And
Yeah, no, I mean, everything that I've basically kind of said is, in terms of recent developments, that's kind of what's on the table for me right now. When I'm not doing video game stuff, I'm playing with bands. I tour on the road with the Family Stone, and so we have some gigs coming up, that I do in between everything, and so that's fun. And then around town in Vegas, I'll fill in for different groups, playing drums and stuff, just to kind of mix it up. I always enjoy performing, so that's a big part of my life too, and always has been. So I've always kind of had the best of both worlds, I guess you could say. I've always been able to do both of the things that I love, which is composing music and being involved in audio with games, and then doing the performances. So that's really what's on tap for me right now. I mean, just doing more of that.
awesome.
Yeah.
So, where can people find you and find your stuff?
Well, I have my website, which is myname.com, and I'm on all of the platforms. So if you look for my name on, anything, Spotify, Apple, Amazon, whatever choice of music listening is, you'll find all my solo albums on there. I also have a side project called Face the Funk, and we have 2 albums out, and it's a band that's very much a funk band that's my brainchild. I sing on that and write all of the music, and I have a big band, with a full horn section and everything. And so that's something that's a fun thing for me. I also have a Patreon, just to let anybody know who's interested in supporting my solo efforts and videos moving forward. I have a whole video series, docu-series on my Patreon that goes literally song by song of what I was doing for all of the Command and Conquer stuff. So if you really ever wanted a really in-depth, like super in-depth conversation about every track for all of those games, like I'm going into all of it, everything I can possibly remember about who I was talking to, what we were thinking, what I was listening to, what synths I was using, changes that I needed to make, whatever, all of that is in story form on there, and a big part of what that page offers.
I'm really glad that you are aware of your importance of the history and your role in the past and in the present and the future for making video game music. Because a lot of people wouldn't talk about it, like past is past, who cares, And you're very open about it. It's super, super great.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. I mean, I've always been pretty open about it. I think that, you have to remember, why people, like what you do to begin with. And then secondly, you also have to acknowledge that, the history and the stories behind that stuff is important to people who really care about it. And I'm very flattered to this day that so many people still care about it. And so I'm more than happy to share those stories, in that capacity, for whoever's interested. So, and I appreciate you guys being interested and caring enough to have me on today. So thank you.
The pleasure is all ours.
To hear all this insight. Pretty amazing. Thank you. Cool.
Especially for Dennis, who knows all those synthesizers and stuff. I have no idea.
I'm very amazed to hear the story behind all these sounds, and thanks so much.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Cool. Right.
Awesome.
That's even better.
Awesome. Like people are like, what? Is that real? Awesome. Such a great thing. Yeah. Well, let's hope Gamescom will work out. Would be nice to meet you in person,
Yeah, we'll see what happens. I'll keep you posted if I end up down there.
Awesome. Thanks for taking the time, Frank. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure, guys. Thank you for having me.
Very much.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Talk to you then. Bye-bye.
Bye.